Since the dawn of human history, humans have wondered about life after death. Now, in ancient times, it was almost a given. Our earliest human ancestors are buried with tools or other religious items, suggesting that there was some type of understanding that life continued after death in some form. Now, in the modern world, it's not such a given. Science has no explanation for how consciousness can continue after death, and it is still very based off of a matter-to-mind perspective. However, much of the world still believes in some sort of continuation, some sort of afterlife, or some type of reincarnation. I am Nora Spinner from Netism, and today I'm going to be walking you through Netism's model of life after death. So, what's most important to understand is that consciousness is an energy state. Now, we all are familiar with the phrase, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Well, we describe consciousness as a particular type of coherent energy state. And this coherence was there before birth. It is birthed into the body. And then after death, that resonance continues. And this is why we put so much focus on learning and evolving while you're alive and focusing on expanding your spiritual resonance, because all of the work that you do will be continued into the next life. If you are a parent, and especially if you're a parent of multiple kids, you know how different children can be raised in the same environment, but have a completely different personality. Now, a lot of this is explained by the spirit's prior experiences. So all of the things that were in its past life, its struggles, its hang-ups, its desires, all of these things are continued into the next life, but they operate at a subconscious level. So we say that the mind forgets, but the spirit always remembers. So the spirit and consciousness are tied together. And they are tied together in a triad with soul, spirit, and mind. So while the conscious mind enters into a new life and it doesn't remember, all of those memories are still there. They are stored within the net and they are stored within your patterned resonance. So we describe consciousness as non-local. So what this means, we are all actually familiar with this, because we go to sleep and we dream every night and our consciousness enters a different state of reality. Now, this is even clearer with near-death and out-of-body experiences. Now, near-death experiences are really interesting. They were first coined in the early 1970s, but they didn't have a good explanation for it. They still don't have a good explanation for it, but it is so widely documented by a lot of reputable people, such as doctors, physicians, and a lot of these experiences have been verified. They've checked surgery records. So, for example, some patients are flatlined, and then they come back with memories of the procedures during the operating room. Patients can describe very specific medical tools that they would have had no knowledge of. They can describe to the word conversations that were recorded in the operating room. And they can even describe the location of family members who are in different parts of the hospital or even different parts of the world. So we have this understanding that consciousness is not necessarily tied to matter because they were flatlined. And they have this spaceless and timeless view of things. What people often describe as having some type of spirit body. They'll be in the room. They won't be able to interact with anything, but they can observe. They disconnect from space and time, from matter, but their consciousness is still coherent and it's still around in some form. So we understand a type of field-based memory. And this is what we talk about with memory of the net. Now, the net is not a physical structure. It's an energetic structure. And remembrance is pattern. It's imprinted into it. So a person who, your habits and large emotional experiences are the most prominent. Now, another really interesting thing is organ donor recipients. Now, this is another thing when it was first brought up that it was basically discounted because there was no explanation for it. However, it is so widely documented that it is understood as a true phenomenon in the medical field, although we don't know how. Now, if we understand field-based memory, this actually starts to make sense because when the organ is transplanted into the body, it's coming from a separate body who had a whole life of pattern experiences. When the organ is transplanted to the new body, that person ends up having memories or adopting habits or passions or even recognizing people that they've never seen or experienced. So one example is a 16-year-old girl who received a heart transplant. And after her heart transplant, she started having interest in cars and she started working on cars and she picked up the knowledge really quickly. Now, when they looked into her donor, they found that it was from a mechanic. How we would explain it is that the pattern of being a mechanic integrated into the person's biofield as the organ was implemented into the body. So this is all understood through field-based memory. It's leaking of those patterns. Those patterns were so strongly implemented into the organ that they implemented it into the consciousness and leaked through in dreams. So this brings us to the question, are we going to continue this perspective that matter is what gives birth to mind? Or are we going to revert to the older perspective where mind gives birth to matter? Now, the most ancient teachings say that mind came first and then matter. We see this reflected in creation stories, how first there was thought, then there was vibration, and then later on down the line, there was matter. With our understanding of consciousness is that consciousness is an organizing principle and that this organizing principle must come first before there is matter. So now I'm going to get into Roger Penrose's understanding of consciousness. Now, Penrose is a PhD physicist who has won a few Nobel Prizes, and he understands consciousness as a point in space-time geometry where collapse is forced. It's not from observation and it's not by chance. It is this particular point in geometry where the collapse is forced into moments of awareness. So Roger Penrose has a very interesting theory of consciousness. And to him, consciousness is linked to moments of wave collapse, which is linked to the geometry of the cosmos. Now, there's this particular geometry of quantum collapse that he is looking at as moments of conscious awareness. Now, within these moments, Stewart and Hameroff have conducted a theory of orchestrated reduction theory of consciousness, which means that at these moments of collapse, which occur in our microtubules inside our neurons, these moments of collapse are what attribute to awareness. And human beings have billions and billions and billions of these little moments of awareness that contribute to our conscious experience. However, we can understand lower forms of consciousness and proto-consciousness by these moments of collapse as well. Now, if we understand consciousness by this geometry, and we know that this geometry is also tied to the universal matrix, to the geometry within the natural cosmos, we can theorize that disembodied consciousness is possible. If consciousness is coherent and it does not require matter, then it is possible for life to continue after death. So Netism looks at this continuation through a triad, through soul, spirit, and mind. Now, these are all different types of energy. The soul is eternal. This, before a person incarnates, it is complete and whole. And when a person incarnates, it actually fractures. And these fractured bits of soul are what contribute to part of it. Your soul is eternal and unchanging. Your spirit is the one that is going through and retaining the lessons. And the mind is your consciousness, your actual thoughts and awareness. And that's what you are most familiar with while you're incarnated. But we say that the mind forgets and the spirit always remembers. So the spirit is maintaining these lessons patterned within its resonance. So if you ever feel like a moment of impulse, like, oh, I shouldn't do that, that's a bad idea, that's lessons that you have already learned in your prior lives. So you may not remember the actual lesson. Most people don't consciously, but subconsciously, your spirit has it ingrained in it. Don't do that. So that's how we're able to advance life after life, is within this patterning principle in the spirit. The same patterning that we discussed earlier that goes on within our organs and our biofield, this same type of patterning continues, but we cannot imprint new patterns after death. And that is why we're incarnating. Our spirits have not evolved to that point where we can continue these lessons. And when we do, we'll be in the next cycle, which is in the ethereal realms. We continue learning there. Learning continues cycles and cycles and cycles beyond that. It never stops. But right now, we are linked to time and space. And time and space gives us those second 2 points that allow us to have a more denser body and denser experiences. Now, establishing that consciousness can theoretically continue after death, I'm going to walk you through the stages of Netism's life after death model. So after the moment of death, and this is recounted through many near-death experiences, is that a person has a view of their body. They are usually in a state of shock. A lot of people in near-death experiences will describe people operating on them. And some people have an overwhelming sense of peace and they feel no pain. And one man wanted to say to the doctor, was trying to say to the doctors, stop, I'm dead. It's okay. You don't have to revive me. I feel fine. A lot of people have some sort of comfort, and when they have the option to return, not everyone wants to, but a lot of people do return, as in accounted in near-death experiences, because it wasn't their time or they still had things that they had to do. Now, after the view of the body, when a person is ready, they enter into a tunnel and they enter towards a light. And it is always described as a warm, loving light that is not identified as anything other than a calming presence. Now, in Netism, we would say that this is the light of the soul. This is the eternal truth that you are before you were incarnated. And it is this guiding light that is eventually guiding you back to your true nature, to your true ascended whole self, to reunite with your soul. And after that, people enter the life review stage. Now, this is described as a wide panoramic view of many meaningful life experiences. And it's important to state here that there is no judgment during this process, only understanding. So you will inevitably see many of the ways that you made mistakes. And this is part of the learning process. You'll also see other timelines. These are made possible through Netism's concept of soul shards, which are other spirits incarnated alongside you, who also share a part of your soul. So you can see these alternate timelines of how events could have happened. You can also see the wider effects of your actions. So if you did something that was really meaningful to somebody, you'll be shown those moments where your actions carried out. And if a spirit has lived a life where they were very mean and selfish and took advantage of a lot of people, they will see the effects of those actions too. However, as long as you are alive, you have the chance to change your narrative. Nobody is stuck within old patterns. Everyone can shift. We all have that eternal light of consciousness which has all elements. And we all came from that, and we're all working back towards that. So that's the big point of the life review stage, is to give you an understanding of where you went wrong, so that you are prepared for your next life. So the spirit actually enters the next life with all of this knowledge, but it doesn't have the experience. It doesn't have the patterns to actually enact this behavior. So a person is born into the next life with all of the answers, but then there is a forgetting, and they have to remember, and they're drawn into the same temptations, the same struggles because of their resonance, because they haven't fixed all of their mistakes yet. So near-death experiences obviously do not cover the return to a next life, because if they went to their next life, they didn't return. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this, and Netism also describes this. And we describe this from a multiversal perspective. So a human spirit isn't necessarily going to come back as a human. They're not going to come back as an animal, but they will come back on any planet in the multiverse. And there are gazillions of these. Any planet that is host to advanced life, they can return to. A vessel is chosen through resonance. It's not often selected. And it's based off of where that person is at. So once a person has just gone through the life review stage, they can stay there as long as they want to. So it's a timeless place. So there really is no set time period that people are remaining in. So a person can stay and look on after loved ones as long as they want to. Whenever they are ready to let go of that former life, that's when they go to the next life. And memory is eternal. The net patterns all through resonance. So a person can forget. Consciously, they can forget, and they can enter that new life knowing that that life that they lived, all of those lives that they lived beforehand, are still meaningful. They are still there in their soul's development. And those memories can be accessed by a spirit through past life regression and through meditation. So if you found this interesting, definitely check out netism.org and Living Netism, because that is where we are discussing things. Living Netism is a community site. And I also have my first book is released, The Young Man and the Sage. There is a chapter on life after death and much, much more about being a spirit involved in a living, breathing net in a living, breathing multiverse. So definitely check it out. It's available on all major retailers, The Young Man and the Sage. Thanks for watching.